Hey everyone, it's good to see you all. So this week I wanted to talk about just some more DIY kind of puppeting kind of hacks. We've been playing with these skeletal meshes. You've looked at it from like a video game kind of controller kind of aspect. You've looked at it from like a cinematic sequencer kind of aspect. And this is getting into some like virtual production kind of territory, like things you could do live with a skeletal mesh and an avatar. Um, and hopefully this is a place you can kind of build off of. And I just want to show you kind of a quick, rough and simple version of like something you could start to play with. We have this project here, which of course I'll share with you. And I'm not going to fully build out everything just because they're already starting to build off of some things that we already know, but I'll try to show you. It's actually pretty quick to set this up. Um, some of the differences in this, I've got a camera actor already in the scene. I got my floor, and I set up some simple 3-point lighting. If you've ever done like the video and sound class that used to be Hyper Cinema, maybe touches on this too, but pretty standard kind of interview lighting. A key shot, or what is it, one from the left, one from the right, one from the back, and kind of balance it. And then I also have like a spotlight up here just to get a little bit of fill on the whole floor, less so than the character. And then I have my blueprint, a virtual character, which we'll dive into more in a bit. You can see that the character, and this is just the same Daz character. I'm going to walk through how I exported this. It's got a pose. It's the developer one where there's no like skin on it. I did apply some eyeballs just because I think it's a little creepy without the eyeballs. But basically, just to check out what's going on here when I hit play, I can get rid of that. I'll talk about what that is in a second. But you can see I've kind of set the camera up so it looks like the character's looking at it. When I hold down the 1 key, it brings up a happiness emotion. When I bring down the 2 key, there's an anger emotion. I'm just touching my keyboard right here. When I hit the space bar, kind of flap the mouth open like that, so you could almost like talk like this. Let's see if I can make it look like I'm talking with this keyboard. I think you get the idea. And so that's just a really rough and simple kind of like setting up almost like a virtual production kind of character with some basic keyboard control. So let's take a step back. What we talked about a little bit maybe in the last video is the Daz marketplace. And this is where you might have to spend a little money if you want to replicate some of these things. But you should, some of the stuff we're working with today, you don't have to. I just want to make you aware of these things. We've talked about morph targets, and morph targets are kind of like a mesh-based shifting between one state of the mesh and the other state of the mesh. So things like facial expressions are most commonly used for morph targets. This is different than anything that has to do with the skeleton primarily. It's not an animation necessarily. It's kind of like a binary state between two different aspects of like a mesh, or two different positions of a mesh. In the marketplace, you can see they sell expressions as morph targets. This is a really common one I like. I hate that you have to buy it separately for the female and male. I'm demoing with the male character, but I just found this one quickest. Right now it's like $6.99, so it's actually not a bad price. And you can start to see that these are all the different facial emotion kind of morph targets you could apply to a character. And if you want a little more description of it, you make sure that who's it compatible with: Genesis 8, Genesis 8.1, compatible software, Daz to Unreal, what's included. Here's like you start to get a sense of like, oh, there's a serious, there's a glare, there's a bored, a bereft. Cool. I just want you to make you aware of that's where I got some of this stuff from. On the other side of the spectrum, we also talk about poses. These aren't quite animations. They're almost like a single frame animation. And I found these two, they're kind of ridiculous. One's called like Solarized and one called White Mustang. Again, check compatible figures, male, 8.18, Daz to Unreal, bridge, what's included, 30 poses for the base male that you kind of get a preview of here. So yeah, this is again like not needing full animation stuff. You could always put your character in a chair with a sitting pose, you know, and like have the head be kind of tracked by your iPhone that we'll look at later. Um, Again, I already own all this, or it's just I went through the process of buying it. This is the kind of stuff you want poses and expressions if you're looking for this in the marketplace. And I want to come over to Daz, like if I've already purchased these things. You can see I have my Genesis 8.1 male here, and just to take a step back, I have to switch interface, remember how to do it. While I have my 8.1 male kind of selected, I can come over to poses. There's some other like pose systems I've found. This was one that's different than the one I showed, but I could put them in this pose. That's, oh, it is only the bottom pose that's translating. So if I find the full body, so there's like a sitting one. You could put a cube down in Unreal Engine. That would help out. Sometimes the poses don't show up, so I have to go find them. This like actually, let's see, this is like smart content. Like when you have something selected, it'll show you, and this is every single thing you have. So I can come down here to my Solarized Poses, the one I was showing you earlier. Where is that? So again, you get these kind of ridiculous poses, but if you want to export them, like I'm not going to cover how to export the Daz character because there's a separate video we already covered on that. But you can, while your character is in that pose, you can go to Edit, no, sorry, File, Send to Daz to Unreal. I would name it like A_pose and whatever you want. For asset type, you're not going to do pose, you're going to do animation. We talked about that a little bit. It's basically a one frame animation. I think it's the easiest to work with. You can turn off morphs and all that. That's all good. Again, I'm not going to do it. I already did it. So that's kind of how you set up the poses. And then for the expressions, it's a little bit different. We kind of talked about that again before. If I go to Send to Daz to Unreal, and choose Enable Morphs and go to Choose Morphs, I'm exporting as a skeletal mesh this time. This is where you can choose the morphs to export. And if I go in here and remove all to start from scratch, again, one thing you'll want for this assignment is the AR kit. That's how we can get the Apple iPhone kind of like facial animations enabled with this. These are all morph targets. They're just ones that are designed to work with Apple's iPhone AR kit kind of like system. But other ones I purchased, it's kind of like wild, like there's so many things in it. But if I think under head usually is where some of these facial expressions you'll get. And you see I've even like got more than we usually do. You know, I could add fear to it. I could add flirting and frown and all that. Add as many as you want. I think I added happiness, sad, anger, frown maybe. I added a few in, and then you know, accept. Again, I'm not going to walk through. I just like showing you the process of how I did this. And if I come back to Unreal Engine, let's go straight to my skeletal mesh. Like I'm in this avatar folder, and again, this is the skeletal mesh file. If I double click on that, you can see over here we have the bones like we usually do. That shouldn't be anything new. I'm going to get a little closer to the face. Over here on the right, we have our morph targets, and you should see these if you did it correctly. And again, these are just kind of, these weights are basically your like percentage that you're applying it to. So if I do sad from 0 to 1, you can see that that's it. I can put it back at 0 really quick with that toggle there. Forward. Some of these are very like nose sneer right. Is like, that's more for the AR kit thing. It's like literally translating your face into 50 different morph targets in real time, just to try and capture all that. But I'm going to zero in as like sad, happy, confused, bored. And then there's also one actually from the Apple AR kit, just jaw open. That's what I'm using as the puppeting kind of tool. A funny thing is you can exceed these bounds, I think. So, you know, you could really go crazy here. And have some weird fun. You can also go into reverse, so like -3. You can get some real kind of like monster party kind of vibes with that. I'm going to leave this open because I want to keep that as a reference. Now, I made a blueprint here. You could just go to blueprint class. Normally we've been using character and even pawn. That's more for the video game stuff. Like you could totally do this, and if you still wanted the kind of like walk cycles and animation control aspects. I'm actually using actor for this one, just because it's less complex. I don't need all those usual things that I'm kind of playing around with. So I made one called BP Virtual Character Keyboard, and it's actually really simple. Again, I'm not building this from scratch like I usually do, partly because it's the simple future ones I'll build from scratch just because they're more complex and you'll want to follow along. I added a skeletal mesh component in here, and then in my skeletal mesh I found my SKM avatar. So if you go to the viewport, there's our character. There's no collision stuff because we're not moving around. This is more set it and forget it. And then event graph's the big one. And I want to use the keyboard to control stuff. So in event begin play, you know, the first thing that happens when you hit enter, I'm doing this enable input get player controller. Again, player controller index 0 defaults to your keyboard 99% of the time. And you're saying enable input. You're saying that you want this blueprint to be able to listen to keyboard input, which we want in this case. Without it, you be hitting your keyboard even if you set up these events that are connected to your keys, but it won't be listening to it. You need to do that on every single blueprint you make. And then over here, when I drag off my skeletal mesh here as a reference, I can drag off and say set morph target. And this is something that when it's triggered, I can change the value of a specified morph target. Now in this case, we have to type it in, and this is case sensitive, all that good stuff. So if we come over here, if you really want to check, you could even say copy names. We're confused. Command A, Command V. And again, that's the same thing, like whatever the value is here from 0 to 1, will be how much of we're applying to that character's morph target in real time. I guess I could make 2 of these. Actually, let's even take a look at this. I'm gonna get rid of these just so you can see what my logic's at. When I press 1, when it's pressed, I could have it set it to 1. And I could also copy paste this. And when I release it, it goes back to 0. And I'll clean this up in a little bit. Just you know, I basically just made like a binary switch. So when I come back here and hit play, now if I hit the 1 key, it turns it on and off. It's a little crazy. I guess it's kind of fun. It's almost like a stop motion animation kind of way of getting it, and losing myself in that. I did not want it to be like that. I wanted it to be a little smoother in a transition. So if you remember from the very first video, I made something called timeline. All you have to do is say add timeline. And if you double click in it, it basically, if you've done any kind of like After Effects keyframe animation, even like Adobe Premiere, you can add a float track, which just gives you a value of 0 to 1. I can say like add key, 0, 0, bracket there, and add another key and say 0.5. That's how I made it half a second, and a value of 1. And you can see right there, you can always right click on it and say auto, and that gives it more of a sine kind of movement. I'm going to delete this track because this is literally the same thing I have over here. You can set the length of it here. I think it defaults to 5 seconds. That's probably way too long, you know, like to slowly see a facial expression appear. But when I come back out to my event graph, and it's weird when you double click, it makes a new, like I was saying, like a new tab among your basic ones. And you could also name this so it's a little easier to remember. I want it when I press that it plays, so it goes from 0 to 1, and when I release it, it reverses it from 1 to 0. And it's going to be smooth because every single like tick, it's going to update this, and then I'm going to grab the current value, and that's where we get that kind of gradient over 0.5 seconds from 0 to 1, and that's what it looks like. The only one that's different is now I have one called jaw open. Like you can see I have happy and angry on 1 and 2, but then spacebar, jaw open. This is almost like the more puppeting kind of trick. Yeah, it's the only difference I would say is I made it 0.1 seconds because like you want it to be a little more flappy kind of mouth kind of vibe. I hit compile. And that's it. The only other thing you could play with is, as you can see, I have an animation blueprint. You could go to animation asset and choose any of those poses you were doing. So maybe I want the character on the ground here. And I guess it actually need to do it from, there we go. So my lighting's a little foobarred, so maybe, and also the camera's not in the right place. If I actually hit play, there's just nothing there. So I'm going to show you a trick. One thing to remind you all is in our level blueprint, and again, level blueprint is like it's like a blueprint, but for anything that's just actively in the level. This is how I set the camera to be a specific target. Set view target with blend, get player controller, and get a reference to the camera actor. When we go over cameras again in a second, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but for now, just know that if you want to get this set view target with blend, you actually need to turn off case sensitive for some weird reason. And there you go, and then you could turn it back on, context sensitive. That's what I meant to say. Grab a reference to your camera and get the player controller and say event begin play, and it'll just lock that camera in. You don't have to assign it to a character or anything. If I want to reposition this camera, there's a really nice trick you can use. Rather than trying to choose it, pin it, move it, like what I would rather do is just pilot the camera. Which lets me basically turn the camera into my viewport, and now I can like just move around like I normally would. And I'll probably have to come back and do this because I'm realizing the lighting needs to be adjusted too, so I don't know where the eyes are looking. But once I find a place I like, I can say stop piloting camera. And now, there we go. The camera is wherever I left it when I unpiloted it. If I hit play, you can see that works. So let's get the lighting back a little. I'm guessing all I have to do, I'm going to choose these three together. I don't want their relationship to change. And the biggest thing I noticed is I don't love how blown out it is on the ground, so I can change the attenuation radius. Oop, maybe not. I think we're probably just going to, I'm just making it a little bigger now, actually. Make it a little smoother. And then maybe I need to rotate all three of these. There we go. I'm just kind of making this up just to get something good. Oh, now we can see that the eyes are like in a totally different place than I thought they were. So I'm going to go back to the camera and right click and say pilot. I'm going to try and position myself at a place where it looks like he's looking right at the camera. Sultry, Solarized Pose, or maybe this is White Mustang, I can't remember. And then stop piloting, play. And again, I think I accidentally I hit the tilde key, which brings up the command prompt. Happy, angry, tapping. You can actually hold two emotions down at the same time, which is kind of terrifying. But that's essentially it. We're going to go into more detail on how to manage cameras. I'm going to show you something called OSC, so we can come up with a better control system and even get like audio input to create kind of a basic kind of like thing. And then we're going to wrap up with using the Apple iPhone as like an actual facial motion capture kind of target. So yeah, have fun with this.